Dr. Oksana Haggerty is an educational and developmental psychologist who serves as a learning specialist and the dean of the Center for Student Success at Beacon College in Leesburg, Florida, America's first accredited baccalaureate institution dedicated to educating neurodivergent students with learning and attention issues. She specializes in academic support, cognitive abilities, learning disability interventions, and educational and developmental psychology. She has been quoted by numerous media outlets, including the Los Angeles Times, Self, U.S. News and World Report, Reader's Digest, Cosmopolitan, and Redbook. Dr. Caroline Leaf is a communication pathologist, audiologist, and clinical and research neuroscientist specializing in psychoneurobiology and metacognitive neuropsychology. Since the early 1980s, Leaf has researched the mind-brain connection, the nature of mental health, and the formation of memory. She is the host of the podcast Cleaning Up the Mental Mess and the author of several best-selling books, including Cleaning Up Your Mental Mess, How to Help Your Child Clean Up Their Mental Mess, and Think, Learn, Succeed. Dr. Elizabeth Short is a professor of developmental psychology at Case Western Reserve University. She is the director of the Developmental Masters in Early Intervention program. She is the principal investigator of a grant received from the Office of Special Education Programs dedicated to the interprofessional training of young psychologists, speech-language pathologists, and social workers to improve the lives of children with disabilities. Her primary focus has been on understanding the processes underlying the cognitive, social, and emotional development of preschool and school-age children. We're going to begin our conversation with Dr. Haggerty. Dr. Haggerty, from a child psychologist perspective, what are the most common ways neurodivergent children and teens develop learned helplessness?
I would say that neurodivergent students develop learn helplessness in two opposite ways. When they get too much help and when they don't get help at all, or when they don't get the right interventions. Because when we think about working with students who are neurodivergent, we have to keep a perfect balance between four approaches. We have to provide accommodations. We have to sometimes provide modifications of the curriculum, certainly within K through 12 curriculum. We also have to provide explicit skill development or interventions, and we have to provide supports. So learned helplessness to me happens when the balance of these four approaches is not perfect. When, for example, instead of providing explicit skill development, we rely too much on accommodations or supports. And instead of having the students engage in the classroom with the faculty member or with the teacher, we rely on resource teachers too much, and the students learn the fact that they don't have to participate, and they hope not to be called in the classroom, and they hope that at some point the door will open, the resource teacher will come in and will take the student out of the classroom. So it's not about really not doing the right thing. It's just about doing the right thing the wrong way. And that's where I think the learned helplessness is coming from.
All right, well, thank you. So, Dr. Leaf, how can parents and educators recognize some of the early indicators that a child is experiencing learned helplessness?
Well, the first thing is to recognize that the word neurodivergent is not a medical condition. It's not a diagnosis. It's basically a description. And it's based on the idea that we are unique and different, each of us, and our brains, after 38 years of being in this field, after years of researching the brain with many, many scientists, we recognize that there's uniqueness. So I want to stress the fact that when we talk about signals or signs, that these are still going to be unique to each person, and we must see them as descriptions of signals as opposed to symptoms of a diagnosis, because that learned helplessness will definitely come from when we talk about this as a sign of a disease or something's wrong with your brain. So just the emphasis to stress there that we need to see neurodivergence as what we all are. We're all different. Every brain is unique. So some of the behavioral patterns that emerge are things like withdrawing from different things, not wanting to play with their friends, or being scared to try new things, being frightened of change. These are all like warning signals that something is going on. terms of emotions, they can become frightful, hypervigilant, hypovigilant, so too vigilant or undervigilant. They can be scared, edgy, nervous, anxious, all those kinds of things that we see that are telling us that something isn't right. And we need to observe our children without pathologizing childhood. That's really important, to recognize that we will have ups and downs. So it's very important to look for patterns that there are changes, and that these are patterns, that they're not just a one-off. And to also then look within the context of a child's life. So what is going on in that child's life? So it basically, once you start seeing patterns of things like withdrawal and anxiety and that sort of thing, it's then to use this as a launch pad to describe the who, the what, the when, the where, the why of what is going on in the child's life.
All right, well, thank you. So, Dr. Short, in your professional experience, what are some of the obstacles or challenges that parents and educators face in trying to help children overcome learned helplessness?
I think some of the major challenges are that we need to recognize failure is a normal event for everyone, for these children as well as every one of us. And failure is an opportunity for us to learn something. So instead of making someone feel badly about the lack of success, we have to help them celebrate failure as an opportunity for change. We have to change this learned helpless approach to one of learned optimism. The reason that children feel helpless is they don't think they can do anything in the face of failure. And both our other speakers just mentioned, and I think it's really important to emphasize, we need to help children figure out strategies for overcoming failure and for really challenging themselves in this situation and believing that this isn't a permanent state of affairs, but rather a temporary one that allows us to then gain new skills and be successful. The danger is we do too much for these children. Again, this is not a new comment, but a sustained comment, right? We do too much, and then they feel helpless, and they wait for us to do this. We have to empower them with the skills to be successful and to believe that they can overcome any obstacle, provided they acquire the skills and they put forth the effort to complete the job. Many kids read a book when they were little, the little engine that could, right? And that's a motto, I think, that all of us in the face of failure or struggle need to recognize, that if we keep on trying and we bring the right tools to the table, that we will be successful in our own time. We all respond at different rates, and we need to recognize that and compare ourselves to ourselves and not everyone around us.
All right, well, thank you. So, Dr. Haggerty, Dr. Short brings up a good point about how important it is for parents to be able to develop and craft some strategies to help their children overcome learned helplessness. Help us with that. What are some strategies that parents can deploy at home?
I would like to share two strategies that we certainly use here at the Center for Student Success a lot, and they are relatively simple but surprisingly underemployed. One of them is following the old adage of catch them being good. I think I'm seeing it all the time, and maybe it's the educational system. We very often act like those proverbial bad managers when we notice people only when they do something wrong. And I don't think we spend as much time talking about the successes as we spend talking about failures. And so I would like to turn this conversation and just encourage parents and caregivers and educators to spend time analyzing successes just as much as analyzing failures, in a sense that we need to catch students doing something right, and we need to ask the question, just like the question we ask when the student fails: why did you do it? What did you do? We need to ask the same questions when the student succeeds. How did you do it? Do you remember what you did? So analyzing and sitting with the students and talking about their success to make sure that they can understand, because sometimes they just do the right thing and maybe not even notice that. So for us, it's very important to pause, to stop, and to sit down with the student and catch them being good, and then ask the question, how did you do it? Let's talk about that. That will help students recognize their own successes and then repeat them in the future, because you will help the student pinpoint the behaviors that led to success. And to me, this is a great way to overcome that failure mindset and move to the growth mindset.
All right. So, Dr. Leaf, we understand that educators have a lot on their plate in the classroom these days, but is there a way that they can possibly, as teachers, adapt their methods to help children with learning and attention orders who are struggling with learned helplessness to be able to succeed in the classroom?
Absolutely. I've worked with thousands of teachers through South Africa and in this country. And one of these two main things that I would recommend, and the first thing, and this is what I've done for many, many years in my career, is working with teachers, is to help them with their own wellness and stress management. We all understand the pressure that teachers are under, but a teacher that knows how to be able to just embrace and process the unlimited capacity that we have as humans to basically tap into the compassion and empathy and strength within our brain. If we understand how to do that with little breaks in between and knowing how to rest our brain and mind, that is a wellness empowerment strategy that is inevitably going to support the teacher. They get so drained and so exhausted, and when we're drained and exhausted, that's when we know we make the mistakes. But we don't have an unlimited supply of strength or compassion or energy in our brain and our mind. And so, but what happens is when we tie those doors close. So one of the first things that I would do with teachers, and what I recommend with every teacher, is to help them to understand, to recognize the signs, which most of us are pretty good at doing, of where we've reached this exhaustion point, but then to give them the strategies and tools to be empowered to be able to know how to deal with that stress management. So I've shown in my work and my research a significant improvement in teachers' ability to transfer when their own wellness is improving and they know how to tap into their own resources. They model this for children. And when they are able to model this for children, children will do what you do, not what you say. And so if you demonstrate this as a teacher, then this carries over to the child. And then that enables things like what Dr. Haggerty said and what Dr. Shaw said about the learned helplessness, about the focusing on the positive. This enables a different level of energy in that classroom environment between the teacher and the child when their own levels of wellness have been managed. The other thing is to provide teachers with more support. I mean, it's the classic age where they need more support. And one of the things I would do in all the schools I worked in was to bring in the surrounding the people in old age homes and people that aren't working to come into the classroom and to support the teacher. I think that's a massively important thing. And then just one last little point, and that is to do with mindsets. The word mindset was mentioned by Dr. Haggerty. Done a lot of work and research in mindsets. Our expectation mindset, what we expect to happen, is what we will wire into our neural networks, our mind-brain-body connection, which is that big word, psychoneurobiology. And so if a teacher's expecting to battle, if a child's expecting to be helpless, if the whole environment this is so difficult, if this is the mindset that's set up, this is the mindset that will be lived. So it's to be able to help our teachers to be able to develop the mindset, an expectation mindset, and in that way transfer that to the children, and that not to develop this sort of learned helplessness that happens in the teachers as well.
All right. So, Dr. Short, we've talked a little bit about coping strategies and coping mechanisms that parents can do in the home, but I want to shift a little bit to ask you this question. Are there any specific proven therapeutic interventions that can help children with learning and attention issues who are experiencing learned helplessness to be able to conquer that?
Yes, I think actually both of the previous speakers spoke to some of this, so I want to kind of support what they said and then kind of go on from that. And that is, for sure, strategies like catching a child being good, both by parents and teachers, is really important, right? And I talk about that because I think too often we never notice at all the good things that children do. And so they don't notice the good thing. It's not surprising they see themselves as failures. We point it out to them at every chance we can. And so again, that's important for learning to help change the situation, but we also need to be really mindful of sharing their positive successes. When I think about what works, I'm going to sound like a very strong behaviorist, but I think the behavioral strategies are really important. What we need to do is identify the specific behaviors that we want to see in kids, or that we're trying to achieve in a child, or we're trying to help the child identify what they're trying to do. And then we're going to have to make sure that what we're asking them is something that's achievable. None of us can decide we're going to go and run a marathon and the next day go out and do it. We have to identify small steps that can be accomplished and help people experience satisfaction and joy when they've accomplished that, and that these small little steps build on the next step. So we talk about these kind of SMART strategies that are set specific goals, measure them well, make sure they're achievable, right? Make sure that they are kind of timed or reliable and relevant to the child. And what that means is, we have a goal that we want kids to accomplish, and we lay it out for them, and we have them have buy-in to this. And then we have a time frame for which that needs to be done. How many of you have said, I'm going to do that tomorrow, and then tomorrow never comes? We need to have very clear behaviors with clear guidelines for how to accomplish them and when they're due. And then we need to hold people accountable, and that includes kids. And when they're not accountable, we need to step back, like Dr. Haggerty said, and think about what's getting in the way here and how can we help them do this. Don't just celebrate success. Look at the failures and point out the good things that occurred in the failures, but the things we need to tweak in order to help them be successful.
All right. So, Dr. Haggerty, for most kids, the universe of people in their lives goes beyond just mom and dad and their teacher. So I'm wondering, what role can extended family play in fostering in neurodivergent children a sense of agency and competency that helps them to be able to battle learned helplessness?
I would say the best thing we can do in extended family or even friends is to resist the temptation to do it for the student. Because sometimes we think, oh my gosh, this task is so difficult and so big and my student cannot do it. But just like Dr. Short said, if something is, if you cannot do something, the first step is too big. You need to break it down and find this smallest step that the student can do. So recognize the fact that when you ask the student to do something, it's not going to be perfect. It's probably going to be very messy. It's going to be longer. And you can always pick up the phone and call the school and get the answer within 5 minutes. But think about the advantages of you asking the student to go and talk to the teacher themselves and bringing the message home and you discussing this message. Because when you pick up the phone and do something for the student, and I hope we're not talking here about writing essays or doing math problems, because those are horrible because there is no skill or knowledge development. But even doing those little things for the students can create a sense in the student, and they won't tell you this, but they will feel, you know what? They don't trust me. They don't think I can do it. Even those small things. So my advice and my recommendation is try to resist the temptation of doing it for the student. I know you have the best intentions and you want to make it faster and easier and nobody should suffer for that. But at the same time, understand that when you do it for the student, the signal that you send the student is that I don't believe in you, I don't think you can do it. So I'm doing it instead of you. So I would say that we all need to remember that when we deal with growing individuals, students who are in development, we need to remember that every single step, every single task they complete on their own lead to development. And every single task we remove from them lead to no development, and very often to also the feeling that I'm probably a failure. I cannot do it because my mom, my aunt, my friend had to do it for me. So that's my position on this question.
All right. Well, thank you for sharing that. So, Dr. Leaf, there's a saying, teamwork makes the dream work. And I'm wondering in this regard, can you elaborate a bit on the potential benefits of collaboration between parents, teachers, and mental health professionals in helping to address learned helplessness in children with learning and attention issues?
It's absolutely essential. And it's one of the things that's been very concerning to watch over the past, almost 3+ decades from the 80s when I was trained and we worked as a team. We never, ever worked with a child as an individual. It was always the team, and the child was the center of the team. No matter what is the age of the child. The narrative was built around the child. Now, this takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of effort. It's not quick and fixed. It's something that a quick fix. It's a long-term process, but it is extremely empowering, and it bounces directly off what the other two speakers are saying about how we need to empower the child to empower themselves. Yet they need the facilitation of a team of experts, which include the parents, the teachers, the therapists, and so on. So teamwork is absolutely essential. Also, teamwork that puts the child at the center to help them co-create the narrative and understand the narrative of their life and the context is going to change how the child perceives themselves, because a child will perceive themselves, child, adolescent, adult, will perceive themselves based on how a person perceives them. And as the previous speakers have also said, if we give the message that, oh gosh, there's something wrong with you, oh gosh, we need to do all these things for you, they're going to perceive that you perceive them as being unable and different and broken. Whereas what we need to explain to them or support them as a part of a team, we are giving them the message, hey, we recognize that all of us battle, and we are here to work with you, to help you, to empower you, and to facilitate you through this process. Obviously, you don't use those words, but that is the concept that is evolving with working in groups. So I mean, working as teams. So I really hope, I know that we would spend hours as whole teams working with helping children, and it was very, very, very successful in helping a child learn to empower themselves, and helping parents. Parents need to be very involved in the process as well, in being empowered to help their children.
All right. So, Dr. Short, we kind of touched on this topic a little earlier, but I want to get a little more granular with this. Can you give us kind of a blueprint on how parents and teachers can help students celebrate the small wins that help them build confidence and a sense of achievement as they're moving forward in life?
The only way to celebrate small wins is to document small wins. And we're not, I mean, honestly, I don't believe many of us are very good about documenting small wins and documenting wins that are within the win window for each child. That sounds like a funny statement, but what I mean by that is in a classroom, instruction needs to be individualized. That's all there is to it, because kids are operating with different skill sets. And so each child in the classroom, you can document their wins if you use them as their baseline and you watch and document the change in performance across time in that child. And so if on day one, the child can learn 5 spelling words and next week they're able to do 6, I can document that and say, look at you. You're getting better at this every single day. See how that hard work pays off? But you have to be able to show it. I think the mistake we do is, the mistake we make is that we often try to rely on our memory. And so for me, I'm a big recorder. I'm a big charter. I ask parents to chart behavior. I ask children to chart behavior for themselves and chart the behavior of their parents, so we can look at how these behaviors change across time. If you can collect data for a week, you can show how things started out slowly and then they started to improve, right? And you can show where behaviors are really growing quickly, and maybe you can drop them off the reinforcement schedule. But the point is, it all needs to be documented. If you're going for small wins, you have to have specific behaviors that are easily documentable, meaning they're measurable. And then you have to show people about how they're doing and what's working and what isn't. You know, one of the speakers, I think it was Dr. Haggerty, talked about awareness, and I might be wrong about that, but getting people to reflect on what they've done and what is influencing their behavior is really important, not only for success, but for failure as well. What strategy did you use? Did it work? And if it didn't work, how can we tweak it so that it would work? So again, my best suggestion is people need to be better at recording data and documenting, because when we rely on our memories are fallible and we only see the negative. We rarely see the positive.
All right. So Dr. Haggerty, since you are actually working with collegiate children, well, I call them children because I'm an old man, but children who have learning and attention issues, I'm wondering about this question. Are you seeing 18, 19-year-olds entering college who still have this sense of learned helplessness? And if so, Is there any way at this point in time to reverse that?
Yes, we are seeing that unfortunately a lot. And as I said at the very beginning of this episode, it's very often comes from the fact that the balance between interventions, explicit skill development, accommodations, modifications, and supports was not perfect or was not individualized to the needs of this particular student. We also see it when no support, no interventions, no accommodations were given at the right time. So when students arrive to Beacon at the age of 18 and 19, we are often past the, I would say, meaningful educational interventions, but we can still do a lot in the sense that we can still build a lot of compensatory strategies and positive habits for executive function development that will help students to be successful. So every single time, be it attention development between the age of 4 and 6, or reading development during the first and the second grade in elementary schools, in the elementary school, or executive function development at the college, we have to know where that point in which the true development can happen, and we should help students right there. At Beacon College, we work a lot with executive function. We work a lot with awareness, truly awareness, and thinking, as Dr. Schott said, about what did I do? How did I do it, both good and bad? How did I do it? And so that I can replicate it in the future or avoid it in the future. But that's a big thing of what we do. And very often it feels like having to reverse the tide, but we have to do it sometimes. And through consistent work, it does happen.
All right. So, Dr. Leith, Dr. Haggerty brought up a good point here, too. As a parent, we typically aren't given a guidebook once the nurse hands us the baby in the delivery room. So, basically, you do your best as you can as a parent. But I'm wondering, is there a way that you could suggest to strike the perfect balance between not over-helping and fostering a sense of independence, autonomy in a child who has learning and attention issues?
It was such a great question. So first, I wanted to stress the concept of learned helplessness. We learn. And I want to just undergird what the other two speakers have been saying about the fact that this is habits of forming. Part of the work that I have done is how long does it actually take to form a habit and to make these changes, or to learn helplessness, or to overcome helplessness. And it's not going to happen overnight. So the first part of helping to strike this balance is the recognition that it actually takes around 9 weeks, somewhere between 58 and 63 days of daily guided, going through a process of around 15 minutes a day of building these new habits in. So in the case of this situation, is if a child has learned helplessness, I should say, that it's not, and the parents are learning how to change this, and there's a whole lot of learning going on around this whole, the whole experience that the family and the child are having. This is not going to change in short periods of time, but needs to have a dedicated time spent daily, at least 15 to 30 minutes a day, going through over 63 days. And a planned and guided process incorporates the elements that you've been hearing all of us say, which is to become aware of the emotions, the behaviors, the perspectives, which are the mindsets, how their body's responding. It's to reflect on those. That's the second thing, is we have to reflect. If we don't reflect, which is like a light being shone through a prism, a white light being shone through a prism, and it comes out with multiple colors on the other side, we have to teach ourselves and our children how to reflect on what we've become aware of. Otherwise, awareness just creates more problems because you don't know what to do with what you're aware of. So once we help a child to become aware of the learned helplessness signals and the parents and where they what the balance is and to strike the balance, there's a period of reflection. And that needs to be documented. As you heard Dr. Schott say, we need to document, we need to write these things down. We need to then be able to reconceptualize, okay, this is the situation, how can we look at this differently? We need little action steps. So those are 5 things that I've just itemized that are gathering awareness, reflecting, writing, reconceptualizing or rechecking, and active reaching or doing some kind of an action. If that is done daily, you can then together, the parent-child team can help to identify and unpack and rewire in the whole psychoneurobiological, which is the mind-brain-body network. The other thing is to understand the difference between helicopter and safety net parenting. And helicopter parenting, as we all know, a helicopter hovers, and that hovering, which we want to just bubble wrap our children and protect them from life, but we can't. And when we do, if helicopter parenting removes things like unstructured play, and we know that that's reduced dramatically over the past few years, and that has impacted children's ability to be self-empowered and develop in dramatic ways, where they land up going to university with these, battling at the ages of 18 and 19 because of all these different patterns that they've learned. So things like unstructured play would fall under another version of striking the balance, which would be what I would call safety net parenting. So helicopter parenting we don't want to do. That's the hovering, that's the too much structured play, that's always trying to do things for the child, everything you've heard that we shouldn't be doing. Whereas safety net parenting, if you imagine a circus and you've got your acrobats and they're climbing up the side and there's all the different levels and they can swing from and jump from and do all their wonderful things, and there's a safety net right at the bottom. As parents, we cannot climb up the ladders with them. That's the helicopter parenting. We need to let them climb up the ladder. We need to let them swing, jump, and fall. We need to let them experiment and facilitate and be there to catch them, to help them. And that's where we do this whole awareness, what have we learned, what's the good, what have we learned from the mistakes, and that kind of philosophy. But this is going to take constructive time. So when I worked with parents, when I worked in schools, we would work in cycles of 9 weeks, because that's actually how long it's going to take to build a network. So we can start doing things which a lot of people do. Start with great ideas, but if you don't do it for long enough and in a planned and guided way, one will revert back to the previous behaviors that are in the mind-brain-body network that are driving you.
All right. So, Dr. Short, for teenagers who are transitioning to adulthood, how can parents help them to be able to self-advocate and navigate difficult circumstances in their lives when they encounter people who create obstacles for them or simply lack the understanding about neurodivergence?
This is a really important question and a very difficult question, and I want to kind of take two tacks. First of all, I love that safety net parenting idea, and I think we as institutions need to be really mindful of that, right? Because as they transition from childhood, where we've been coaching them and supporting them, we've been engaged in a process called co-regulation. As we want to move them to the adult world and become self-regulated, you can't just pull out the reins entirely. You need to have a safety net present. And our institutions right now make that difficult on parents. Parents need to work a lot on allowing kids or young adults to make their own decisions, but they need to be the safety net, as was just mentioned, right? They can't overfunction for the child or the adolescent, because the adolescent needs to take on some of these responsibilities. But we need to focus or reshift our thinking as people become adults, because I think the way that students get into trouble as they transition into college is because for many of them, they no longer have their parent coach who's been helping them along the way. And now they engage in behaviors that I guess I would refer to as broken agreements. I just published a paper with Dr. Michael Manis on this issue with respect to adults. And that is, what happens is you have an assignment. The assignment is due. That's the agreement you've made. You're going to turn the assignment in. And then it comes time for the assignment and you don't turn it in. So you have this broken agreement. And then you're late in the assignment and you start getting anxious and you start feeling shame and you start figuring out how you're going to turn it in. And then you turn something in that's not so good, right? Because you're trying to complete the agreement, but you're going to meet with failure anyway because it's an unsuccessful situation. We need to get young adults to recognize they're making agreements and their job is either to satisfy that agreement or negotiate a new agreement. Speak, as we've talked about before, go to the professor and say, I'm having trouble with this. May I have some extra time? Or do you have some suggestions for me, right? But the point is, we need to stop thinking about, are they paying attention? Are they doing this? And instead talk about functional behaviors that are getting in the way, that are important for adult life. And that is making agreements, completing agreements, doing it in a timely fashion, asking for support when you need it. And our support people need to recognize that if this inability to engage in high-level executive functioning is at the heart of the problem or the difference that this individual has, that they may need a coach for the rest of their life. And by the way, don't some of our top executives have an executive assistant that serves as a coach for them? Needing a coach isn't a problem. It's not getting one when you need one that is a problem. So working on self-regulation, but recognizing we have to gradually release the control that we've had on these young adults and allow them to be successful, but to keep that safety net in place.
All right, that's going to be our last word. Dr. Oksana Haggerty, Dr. Caroline Leaf, and Dr. Elizabeth Short. Thanks for the knowledge.